Greetings and welcome to Flanigan's Ecologic. I am your host, Ted Flanigan, and this week we're talking with Chris Calwell. Chris was a founder of Ecos Consulting, a firm that managed utility energy efficiency programs and also conducted energy use research. Chris is now a principal at Ecos Research, focusing on transformational changes in energy use and energy efficiency. Really excited to have Chris on the show today. Hey, Chris, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Great, thank you.
And where are you sitting as we speak?
I am in the home office in Durango, Colorado, of all places.
And it looks like the sun is shining there.
Shockingly enough, the sun is shining for yet another of the 320 days a year that it does that.
Isn't that fantastic? You know, all those heating degree days and all that sunshine to match it, right? It's the perfect.
The joke around here is it's sunnier in the winter than it is in the summer. Not warmer, but it is sunnier.
Huh. Oh, that's interesting. Well, that's when we need it, right? We really need it in the winter. I've already introduced you as the co-owner of Ecos Research, focusing on clean energy technologies and their transformation in our society, which we're going to be talking about for half an hour. What are you working on today? What's happening this week?
You know, I do a couple of different things, some of which are associated with Ecos Research and some of which aren't. So I teach a graduate course out at Middlebury's campus in Monterey, California. So we just wrapped that up in the fall. That was a class on International Renewable Energy policy. They've got me developing a new course for them right now on sustainability and climate science. And it's going to be purely asynchronous, which is something I have not done before. You know, you pre-record your lectures, the students watch them on their schedule, and then you interact with them over office hours, but not in person, not live on Zoom. So that's going to be quite interesting. And then we continue to do a little bit of consulting work in the Energy Star world. And so we're in discussions with them about some additional work related to batteries and electric vehicles and things like that. And then my other passion is clean tech investing, which is not something I do through Ecos Research, but it's tracking down the companies that are doing the best job of preventing climate change and proactively investing in them rather than just running down a checklist of bads that you want to make sure companies aren't doing if you want to buy their stock.
Yeah. In all of these areas we're going to get into this. That's great. Let's back up just for a second, because everybody loves to hear sort of the personal side. Born and raised where? I have no idea where you were born and raised.
Born in Independence, Missouri, down the street from where Harry Truman was, and grew up in Topeka, Kansas. So I always say to people, if you grow up in Topeka, Kansas, you can't make fun of where anybody else is from.
And then off to Trinity College, which is in San Antonio. Is that right?
Trinity University. Yeah. It's a liberal arts college in San Antonio. And so that was a giant culture shift for me, you know, going from white bread, middle America to a town that was 65% Hispanic. And a great education probably saved me from the absolute culture shock of having moved directly from Kansas to Berkeley, which I think most people couldn't survive.
So, and you got a degree in environmental studies there
Right.
in Texas, and then went to Berkeley, and you were part of that ERG group, the Energy Resources Group at Berkeley?
Energy Resources Group. Yeah, the ERG Mafia, they call us sometimes.
Yeah. And Dave, we have lots of friends in common that went there, and then great program. And then you went off to NRDC directly. Is that the sequence?
It's actually even sort of more direct than that, because they gave me my first summer job when I was halfway through the ERG program. And that's a story in itself. But they said, yeah, you can go work in our DC office for the summer and we'll find a project for you. So I arrived in Washington, D.C. in the summer of '88, the unusually hot summer of '88. And they said, well, we want you to look into this new topic called global warming. We're not sure if it should be something that our organization focuses on. So could you go and talk to the other organizations, see what's happening, and then write us a report at the end of the summer on whether global warming is something that we should focus on. So I was NRDC's first global warming employee.
And you suggested that maybe they ought to take a look at that, huh?
As a matter of fact, I did. Yeah, I'm really kind of dying to go find that original report, which must be on a floppy disk somewhere.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the word climate change wasn't being used much at the time. But literally the first week I was there, Howard Geller and Steve Nadell and a couple other folks said, well, why don't you come with us? We're going to go over to this hearing in the Senate. It's this senator named Al Gore, and they're going to have somebody named James Hansen talking about whether climate change is happening. And I was like, okay, that seems like as good a place to be as any. And so I was in that hot, stifling room the day that James Hansen said, climate change is happening, humans are causing it, and we need to take action. And that was 36 years ago.
Incredible. What great history. And were you at NRDC when we first met? I'm thinking that you were. That I was at Rocky Mountain Institute, and we had launched the Competitech service.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So you came to one of those forums, or maybe multiple forums.
That's right. Yeah. My two bosses at NRDC were Ralph Cavanagh and David Goldstein, and they were big fans of, plunging their new employees straight into the substance of whatever the organization was working on. And they said, go to these meetings. That's where I met Dave Houghton as well, and first time I met Amory was there. And it was just kind of a chance to see the private sector side of energy efficiency innovation, when most of my work at NRDC had been on the public policy side and on partnerships with utilities. So that kind of kindled a very early interest in focusing on private sector innovation and entrepreneurship.
Right. Do you think you came to multiple forums there?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Dave Houghton likes to tell the story that after Competitech became eSource and I had left NRDC and moved out here to Colorado, one of my first projects for him at eSource was working on LED traffic signals. Back in the day, when we really did have incandescent bulbs in traffic signals with color filters in front of them to make the color we wanted. And I think the second of those that I attended, Dave asked me to come do a talk on halogen torchieres. And so we fried up an egg or a grilled cheese sandwich or something or other on a halogen.
It was an egg. An egg, fried an egg on a halogen lamp. What a great image.
We had to make the point to the utilities, gosh, these things are awfully hot and they're not very good as light sources, but they mostly just make a lot of dangerous heat in your building.
So 7 years at NRDC, it must have been extremely fulfilling and filling. What prompted you to move on to Ecos Consulting? Was it just to get into a different geographic location?
NRDC was a fabulous training ground for me and a wonderful immersion in state, national, and international policy issues. And so I finally realized by 1995 or so, a couple of things. I realized I didn't really want to live in the Bay Area for the rest of my life because I never was going to be able to buy a house there. It wasn't home in that sense. And so I needed to find a different place to live. But also, I had just finished reading Ecology of Commerce and just had this powerful sense that I needed to be in the private sector, right? That public policy was enormously important for setting the boundaries and the directions and so forth, but the innovation was going to come from the private sector. And so when I left NRDC and moved to Durango, I had a small number of little consulting contracts, and that was it. And we had to reach out to some peers, and we pieced together Ecos Consulting from four of us who had all met in the residential lighting space, but we were all living in different places. So I still have these humorous business cards that say Ecos Consulting, and then underneath were the four cities of our corporate headquarters, which meant four home offices, and it said Boston, Washington D.C., Los Angeles, Durango.
The booming metropolis. How did you choose Durango of all? I mean, here like you said, you started out in Independence, Missouri, Topeka, Kansas, San Antonio, Texas, Berkeley, California. I guess San Francisco, worked in the NRDC offices there with Ralph and David. How did you choose Durango?
That's a bit of a long story in itself, but in 1993, when I first started looking here, Durango was singularly affordable for what it offered, which was this amazing assortment of outdoor activities, whitewater rafting, mountain biking, skiing, backpacking, all this kind of stuff. And then it had an airport, which I needed for the work I was doing, and great restaurants and a college and live music and all the sort of things that you'd normally have to be in a bigger city for. But Durango was 16,000 people back then. And so I was able to buy a house on 3 acres of aspens overlooking the desert for $100,000. And so it was really it was an affordability, quality of life, and a something that aligns with where I wanted to go with my career. Sort of those 3 things that drove me to move here.
Good stuff. And then you said that ECO started off really focused on lighting, or you guys had come together because you had done lighting projects. What? But I think you got into really supporting the whole Energy Star program, and I think some of the most interesting work was sort of analyzing consumer electronics and sort of taking that information and using it to help to create standards.
Yeah, it was Ecos Consulting got started around residential lighting because one of our original founders had developed this cool model where he said, why don't we pay the rebate to the manufacturer rather than to the consumer? And it sounds like such a tiny little thing, right? Why would that even matter? But he correctly reasoned that if you could give $3 to the manufacturer, by the time that rolled through the markup to the retailer and then the markup to the consumer, you get a much bigger savings on the final price for the
Huh.
same amount of money than if you just
Yeah.
gave the $3 to the consumer. And
Hmm.
so a lot of utilities hired us to implement their energy efficiency programs. And we started adding staff to our office in Los Angeles and eventually opened an office in Portland and moved the headquarters there. And then Lois Gordon joined us. And so all of that
Hmm.
stuff was going
Hmm.
on in the background and kind of funding the enterprise. And so my team was always focused on research and policy. And we thought, if most of the company is going out and trying to grab a bigger slice of the energy efficiency pie, some part of the company should be expanding the pie itself.
Yeah.
And so the research and policy shop's job was to go find new ways of saving energy that no utilities were currently incentivizing or rebating, and figure out what it would take to get
Hmm.
them out of the lab and into the store, or in the early stages of market transformation. So that's why like NRDC and Energy Star were our early clients. And we kind of dove into the consumer electronics space as much as anything because it was a personal interest of mine. I was always a stereo geek and a um, computer geek and that kind of stuff. And so all these various electronic things, if there'd been any attention paid to their efficiency at all back then, it was only in terms of how much energy they used when you weren't using them,
Yeah,
right?
right. The
And
standby or whatever.
yeah,
But how did you did you? I think you've dug in ways that most of us wouldn't. I mean, you actually create a testing lab, right? Or you
that's
created
right.
testing labs, plural.
Yeah, yeah. But we, in the early days, we really did focus on products that were pretty simple to measure so that the notion of
Mhm.
a lab wasn't some, elaborate clean room with people dressed in white coats. You could do it in
Yeah,
office space. And so literally, my colleagues and I got an interest in those external power supplies, the little bricks that power all your electronics. And
yeah.
that became an obsession of ours for a period of years in the early 2000s. And so we literally went to all the shops in town that had donated electronics, like the Humane Society and Goodwill and all these places. And we just bought up every external power supply they had, and we tested about 200 of them.
Hmm.
And such a simple test, right? All the thing is supposed to do is turn 120 volts AC into some lower voltage of DC. So all you got to do is put a load on it and then see, well, how much power comes in, how much power goes out. And the difference between the two is how much that device is wasting. And at the time, Alan Meyer and a lot of other folks were really focused on standby, and saying we got to get devices to use less power when you're not using them. And we said that's absolutely true. And let's also get them to use less power when you are using them. And so we found a bunch of these power supplies were 30 or 40% efficient, 20% efficient in some cases. And so the vast majority of the power coming into them wasn't doing anything useful at all. And we just happened to be in the right time in the right place with NRDC and EPA and the California Energy Commission as funders, to where in the space of a few years, working with our clients, we were able to get a globally adopted test procedure for the products, globally adopted standardized labeling protocol with Roman numerals. And so that
Hmm.
persists to this day. If you pick up an external power supply and you look at it, you'll see a Roman numeral with a circle around it. And that is a shorthand indication of how efficient it is. And then
So the bigger the numeral, the more efficient it is.
correct. Yeah, yeah. The best of them these days, I think, have a Roman numeral 6. And when we
And then,
started,
so you didn't the market with the bottom end was not cut out. Instead, there was just this labeling that makes it clear to consumers.
well, we realized early on that external power supplies were too cheap and they were a
Mm.
component of a larger system. So you couldn't
Yeah,
do rebates on them, right? The
yeah.
utility rebate model wasn't going to work. So we did a combination of voluntary labeling in partnership with Energy Star, mandatory labeling with the Roman numerals agreed to worldwide, and then a series of mandatory efficiency standards in various government jurisdictions around the world. And that's what did finally chop off the bottom. So, we were trying to get rid of what you'd call a linear power supply and get everything over to switch mode or electronic power supplies. And that's a good part of the reason why, the adapter that powers your cell phone and laptop and so forth today is so much smaller than the ones that powered our devices 10, 15, 20 years ago.
And what efficiency are they now?
You can routinely find power supplies that are sort of 80 to 90% efficient now. Depends on their size and depends on how heavily loaded they are. But what amazes me is that there's that persistent belief, I need to unplug these things when I'm not using them. And people are astounded to realize just how little power those things can draw now when they're plugged in. And they're not warm, right? If you go touch them when they're plugged in and not operating anything, they're often just at room temperature, and they might be drawing a hundredth of a watt, a couple hundredths of a watt.
Yeah.
And so that's a real triumph. And one of the things we had to calculate at the end of the whole process was what effect did that initiative have worldwide? And it looked like by the early math we did, 50 or more coal plants didn't get built worldwide to power all of the external power supplies that had been going along for years with really old copper windings in them and linear power supplies.
Yeah, that is an awesome, what a great accomplishment. 50 Rosenfelds, right? Isn't a Rosenfeld a 500 megawatt power plant?
Yeah, that was another endeavor that I worked on with John Kumi years ago, trying to get a standardized metric for energy savings.
Yeah. Wow, how great. The power supply is an interesting story. Were there other consumer electronics that you found that you could dig in on and have also a similar impact?
None of the other projects we worked on ever achieved that scale of savings, just because external power supplies were so ubiquitous. I think the last time we did a calculation, there were like 10 billion of them, and now that number would be quite low. Yeah. If you just look around your house at the number of things that are running on power supplies, I bet you'd find, 15 or 20 of them in your house.
Yeah.
Like that. And so the main other products that we worked on over the years were, we worked on computers, monitors, set-top boxes, game consoles, battery charging systems. We worked on most of the other kind of electronic things you could think of. We took a look at home audio equipment more recently, and in essence, the big ticket items got tackled first, right? So computers, TVs, monitors were some of the biggest, and I still remember looking at TVs for the first time and realizing that you could get an Energy Star label for a plasma TV that might draw 300 or 400 watts just because it had a low amount of power consumption when it was off. And we thought, well, that's the wrong message. Let's at least try to get active mode included in the way Energy Star labels consumer electronics. And now it's routinely included in all the various labels they do for consumer electronics.
God, good for you. So you just sort of, in a nutshell, you've been doing this research on these products and their efficiency or their inefficiencies, and that feeds right into policy, right? Whether it's whether it's EPA, Energy Star, or whether it's California Energy Commission or Title 24 or whatever happens to be. It's really that front end. It's the proof, right? It's the proof of concept that this needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I think we finally realized, some years into my time at Ecos Consulting, that the policy and research team was in essence working on the front end and the back end of market transformation, right? First, we had to identify new ways of saving energy that the utilities weren't rebating yet, and get an efficiency metric, a test procedure, and a labeling scheme in place so that people could even find the good ones. Then utilities in the middle of that life cycle would rebate the heck out of it and drive consumer demand toward the better products. And then we came along with help largely from clients like PG&E, and got funded to help them advocate for mandatory standards at the CEC or federally, so that finally the least efficient products in the segment could just be taken out of the market entirely. And then you could circle back and do that, that whole cycle again at a new level of efficiency with a new technology, either with that product or another product category. So
Yeah.
that was fun. We were bookending the utility incentive process that remained the
Yeah.
majority of Ecos Consulting's revenue over the years.
Yeah, that's really great. Good stuff, Chris. You went to Ecova. What was that?
Ecova was not a different company. What happened was
Okay,
a company called Advantage IQ came along and bought Ecos Consulting in 2009.
I
And they
see.
had made a series of other purchases along the way. And so they eventually bundled all them together and gave the new um, assembled enterprise the name of Ecova.
I see. So nothing really changed in your life.
Well, what changed, and for the better, was that no longer being an owner of the company, I stopped attending board meetings. I didn't do any performance reviews or uh, management of staff, and I just got to be an individual contributor, subject matter expert, business development focused guy. I went around and gave a lot of speeches and talks and attended conferences, and those were some of the happiest years of my life because I never really
Yeah.
wanted to manage a large team of staff. And by the time we sold Ecos Consulting, we had 210 employees.
Oh, is that right? Good for you. But we're really digging in and understanding who Chris Calwell is, what he likes to do, and what he doesn't like to do, and he's clearly likes to be doing the actual research, right, and the education around the actual research, and not the management of a
That's
couple
right.
hundred couple
I
hundred
believe
people.
the phrase is once a nerd, always a nerd.
Oh, geez. Well, you seem pretty balanced. You seem like a pretty balanced nerd to me, Chris. In 2015, and maybe this is just another permutation of the same thing, you formed Ecos Research with my friend Dave Houghton, and also I guess it was another fellow, Greg Hardy. So am I right? Is it just another permutation of your works?
Yeah, it's not radically different than what we did at Ecos Consulting, but it's just the research and policy dimension of it, right? So Ecos Research was never intended to be large enough to run utility incentive programs for
Yeah.
utilities. So we were just focused on finding new sources of energy savings, developing test methods and efficiency metrics, getting into the lab to measure them. And so some of our early work for NRDC was really fun on televisions. And that was a project where we basically discovered that the manufacturers had gotten really clever at running the test procedure on their TVs in a way that made them look pretty efficient. Not unlike what automakers do with the automotive test procedure, right? They know how to get the car to test really well. But we were basically coming in to the lab and saying, well, let's show more normal stuff on a TV, not this standardized test clip, but let's put the kind of stuff on the TV that most people like to watch. And so we joked that we had the Shrek test and we had the Cloudy with a Chance of Meatball test, and different kinds of movies and shows like that. And we were able to show in a real decisive report within our DC that TVs used a lot more energy when you watch them the way most people watch them than the way they were being tested. And that subsequently led to a change internationally in how TVs are measured.
I talked to Dave Houghton about this, your partner, and it sounds like there's a standard video clip or series of video clips that are used in this standard test procedure for all televisions. And part of that includes some real sped up, is that right? High speed video.
It was, yeah.
And then the TVs would perceive that high speed video, and then they would shut down their normal power down to 50% or something.
Kind of. It was a little more complicated than that, but the original test clip consisted of a series of snippets that the trade association had donated for use. And, a lot of action movies and a lot of cartoons do have quick cuts. But if you watch the video test clip that was used worldwide, it was jarring in how quickly things would transition. Yep. And so that didn't represent the kind of TV most people watch. We also, we were just making the point, gosh, most people now have 4K TVs. Why don't we show actual 4K content on the TV rather than this older clip that doesn't really resemble what people watch? And when a TV sees 4K content, it'll often get brighter and draw more power.
Gotcha. How interesting. Wow. Now you've described yourself, I think, as an educator and an investor. You talked a little bit about your adjunct faculty position at Middlebury. When it comes to investing in clean techs, I wanted to ask you a few questions. Certainly, it sounds exciting and risky, like all investing, but what advice can you give? I mean, many of us want to invest in clean techs. We want to invest in in startup companies. EcoMotion is now affiliated with Enertech Capital, which is doing this at quite a large scale, and they've got a whole bank of researchers that are working with them. But what is your advice to people that might be listening that want to get involved with clean tech investing?
Well, I would say that it's not for the faint of heart, right? The traditional ESG, clean focused mutual fund out there, will often largely consist of companies like Apple and Microsoft that clear their screens for, do they do bad things? do they sell cigarettes, or do they manufacture weapons of mass destruction and things like that? And those are all great things, but I was have been more interested in the smaller startup companies where investors, if they believe in them and make a commitment early on, might help them get to scale, and their technologies might make a transformative difference in the climate battle. And so you kind of have to accept the fact that if you're buying those stock in those early stage small companies, the failure rate is going to be fairly high, right? Or some of the companies won't outright go bankrupt, but they'll struggle for a while and maybe never reach scale. And so I have to do even more research to see which ones might make that breakthrough, and I spent some time, for example, looking at mining stocks for the companies that were getting the materials that are critical to make lithium ion batteries. And I think I was right in the fact that they were important, but I was wrong in timing. And so for years, lithium ion batteries were still at such an early stage that the demand for graphite and lithium and some of the other key minerals in batteries didn't take off. Now they are taking off, and you get involved in all these international battles over, the fact that China is very much in control of the supply chain. And so you got to try to find the companies who either can locate those minerals outside of Chinese influence, or the companies that focus on recycling them. And then you have a purely domestic supply, right? Because the old batteries are coming back, being shredded and disassembled in their component parts and then made into new batteries. So those are the kinds of spaces I look in. I've been super interested in the electric vehicle space. And like one of the things I tell people that probably made a breakthrough earlier than most is the very boring, straightforward pedestrian market sector of electric school buses, right? Because we might be at a tiny market share for personal electric vehicles, but the business case for an electric school bus is overwhelming. You got all these kids getting exposed to diesel fumes on aging school buses that have very high fuel cost and very high maintenance cost. And if you can just switch to an electric school bus, not only do you have a sort of a cleaner, quieter, safer, more affordable device for schools to drive around on the roads, and the schools, of course, are forever starved for funding. But on top of it all, you now have this giant battery that's sitting there at a time of day when it can soak up solar, just the time that utilities don't want extra solar on the grid in the middle of the day. And then the bus gets back from dropping off students, plugs back into the grid, and it's a perfect time of day to feed its extra juice back into the grid with V2G and offset the peak. So it's a slam dunk.
And then recharge at night.
Or recharge
or recharge again at night. Yep. Oh, very good. What do you do? What a great discussion. Last couple of questions. What do you do for balance in your life, Chris?
I've retained the same interest in outdoors and photography that I had when I first moved to Durango. And so there's an amazing number of things to go see and explore just around this area. And so still doing a lot of travel and photography. I have this odd little interest in pinball. And so I'll buy up old pinball machines and fix them up, or buy new ones and play them for a while and resell them. And I would say, other than that, just trying to go see new cultures and travel and read.
And of all your global travels, what do you say the most interesting places have been for you?
Well, that's a good question. I have been to Italy 4 times, and it never ever gets old to me. I don't have any Italian heritage, but
it just feels good.
But when I'm there, I'm like, these people have it figured out, right? Architecture, the food, the wine, the even just the vibrancy and the warmth of the people. And I feel very at home there. I love to just wander around with a camera and have no plan at all, right? Just I'm
Yeah.
going to go down the street, turn down any alley that's interesting, stick my head into any shop or restaurant that's interesting, and follow my nose. And that's a lovely part of the world.
What a great thing. Hey, listen, thanks so much for being on the podcast, and thanks for what you're doing on our cause of transforming our energy and environmental society here.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Chris. That's it. Thanks for listening to Flanigan's Ecologic. We'll see you next time.